Hey nerds, what's up? And Happy New Year! Today, my first video of the new year is bringing to you a book review of Operation Bounce House by Matt Dinniman. I was lucky enough to receive an ARC of this because I will be doing one of the release events in February. So if you are in the Seattle area, definitely check that out. I can put the link in the comment section below. But I was super excited about this book, and I ended up saving it to be my last read of 2025 just because, you know, an author I already love, just to kind of see what it's all about. And I think this will be highly anticipated. In case you don't know, this has nothing to do with Dungeon Crawler Carl. It is not the next Dungeon Crawler Carl book. This is a standalone novel from Dinniman that just is completely outside of that universe. And this book primarily follows Oliver, who is a resident on New Sonora, which is a planet that was colonized by Earthers a few generations ago. And they create these portals that take some time to set up that allow instant communication and travel between New Sonora and Earth. And so when we come into the story, that gateway is about to be opened. Now, Oliver is a farmer on New Sonora with his family, and his grandparents came over on the ships that initially brought them to New Sonora. And we are following him, his friends, and his family when it is discovered that a corporation has basically ordered an extermination on New Sonora. And the way that they are doing it is by giving people living on Earth the opportunity to design their own mechs and basically be gamers, destroying the lives of people on New Sonora. So they've set it up like a game so that everybody on Earth is just playing through a virtual headset and they are perfectly safe. And they are just controlling these mechs that come to New Sonora to wipe out the population under the guise of there being revolutionaries and anarchists there, when that's not actually the case. This game, as you might guess, is called Operation Bounce House. So as the story continues, we kind of follow Oliver and his emotions about that and what him and his friends decide to do to protect themselves. Other than Oliver, I'd say our other two primary characters are Lulu, which is Oliver's sister, and then Roger, which is their aging AI technology. He's called a queen bee. So when the colonists first came to New Sonora, they were given a lot of tech to help them get up and running. And one of these was the queen bee system, which was basically a hive of a bunch of robots, AI controlled robots that help do menial tasks and things like that. And Roger, as the queen bee, was a smarter AI, and he's kind of acted as the kids' nanny over the years. And as their parents and grandparents have passed away, he's still working, even though the tech is slowly starting to deteriorate. So those are our kind of three main characters that we follow. Ultimately, I actually really enjoyed this novel. I thought it was a great read. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed Oliver as a character. I think he is not necessarily the typical character you would imagine in this scenario, especially if you're familiar with Dungeon Crawler Carl, which I'll get to in a second. He is, I think, much more kind of what you would view as like the everyday man, someone who's a little timid, a little kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to do my own thing, and is kind of having to deal with the emotions of what is happening in a way that feels realistic. I think we get to see a gamut of reactions to what's happening in ways that feel very authentic and interesting, and I was personally very interested in reading. This book definitely isn't necessarily as fast-paced as it sounds. In fact, I think it has kind of a slow start, and I don't use slow as a bad thing. I tend to really like slow books. I'm just saying for what it sounds like, I would say don't go into it being like, this is just going to be like off to the races right at the beginning. I think there's a lot of build as the book goes on, which I personally enjoyed, but I think is something people need to be aware of. One of my favorite things about this novel is that on the surface, this novel feels like it would just be kind of a silly, fun ride. I mean, just even Matt Dinniman's introductory, not acknowledgments, but little like author's note at the beginning is talking about how he researched by watching kid gamers, and a lot of that silliness that you would think of when you think of the nastiness of kid gamers that have become memeable are throughout the book, and those are so fun. But I think what makes this book worked for me in the same way that it was surprising that Dungeon Crawler Carl worked for me is Matt Dinniman is able to take some very fun and larger than life concepts and really ground them with actually quite interesting philosophical questions, quite interesting notes and observations about human nature. And there is a depth, in my opinion, to what is being presented, even if it isn't a very fun, enjoyable, fast package. There is another layer. And I think that is why I can enjoy a book like this so much, because I think sometimes, I don't know, I've had some people say I'm allergic to fun, and like maybe I am allergic to fun sometimes, but I like being able to have both. And in fact, so surprising, like I finished this novel and felt like I had to talk about it. So if you look in the chapters below, I'm actually doing a spoiler-free review, obviously right now, and then a spoiler review, which really doesn't make sense because this book isn't released on sale to February 10th, which I should have said at the beginning. I'll probably edit something back in to say when it's due out. It's not due to February. I know none of you can watch the spoiler part of the review, which I'll give you warning when I get there. I know none of you can watch it, but maybe you will, like me, finish this book and feel the desperate need to talk about things that happen and come back and see the spoiler section. I also want to talk a little bit about comparison to Dungeon Crawler Carl. Now, I don't think it's super fair that when an author has something that's very popular or the thing they're most known for, that every book after gets compared to it. But I do think it's just a reality. I think a lot of people will be going into Operation Bounce House coming from Dungeon Crawler Carl. I would say a majority of the readers are coming from there. Dungeon Crawler Carl has exploded in the most insane way over the last couple of years. In fact, over even just the last year, I feel like it has just exploded. And so I think I want to talk about that because I think it's like people are going to be curious. So when I went to this novel, I was a little nervous because I felt like it sounded a lot like Dungeon Crawler Carl on the surface. You have this game mechanic, you have a guy who's kind of fighting for his freedom, you have AI involved, you have kind of like this alien idea that's taking over a planet. You see the similarities, right? And I was worried that this would just be kind of Dungeon Crawler Carl in a new skin. And I'm happy to say that, in my opinion, it's not like that at all. The stories are very different despite the fact they share a lot of elements. I think some of that comes down to the main characters, who are very different characters. They are their own beings. They're their new people. I also think it comes down to a totally different tone. This book is way less crass than Dungeon Crawler Carl. It does not have that quite same humor. I mean, it's funny. There was one part I literally laughed out loud. Like, this book is entertaining. It's funny. I'm not saying it's not, but it's just a different kind of humor. It's not that same kind of over-the-top crassness, absurdity. Again, I'm going to say that people are like, there's absurd stuff. Of course, there's a little absurd stuff in this. Like, listen to the premise. But overall, I'd say it's much less. And that also gives it a completely different tone. But like I said previously, there's also some similarities in that it's like, here's this lighthearted thing that has a lot of kind of funny elements, but I've put things underneath it. I've put down-to-earth character moments. I've put some actual interesting questions underneath it to uplift this story and give it a base. And so in that way, I feel like it's similar to DCC, where it's giving you something more than just what it is on the surface. It is slower than DCC. DCC starts off very fast-paced, in my opinion, one thing to the next. And while there's a lot of battles in this, I do think the character moments in the story just works a little slower and builds up in a very different way. So you should know that. Do I think if you like Dungeon Crawler Carl, you will like Operation Bounce House, or the other way around? I'm not sure. I like both of them. I do think they're different enough not to make it a slam dunk. Some of the things I can talk about in a non-spoilery way that are questions or themes that are brought up that I'm personally interested in is one, just interactions on the internet. I think Matt Dinniman and I might have very similar opinions and feelings about the way people interact on the internet. That's all I'm going to say about that. I was reading it and felt, we need to have a conversation about that, because I really felt an undercurrent of some questions about, what our online personas are and how that might affect us in the real world. I also think there's a lot of interesting information about AI in there that isn't typical. I would say it's not kind of our typical conversations because it's kind of underground. In fact, all of these themes, one of the reasons I like them so much is they really aren't like outright there. There isn't really a point, I think, that is directly being made. It's just kind of in the undercurrent, which is my favorite thing. I think there's also an interesting undercurrent of the push and pull of technology and the place it has in our lives, and how that is good and maybe bad, or what the complicated relationship is. I think there's a lot of things put in the story that does not make it cookie cutter. There is not something you're going to come out of this book and be like, oh, this is bad and this is good. I think there's just kind of an overall discussion of that I kept finding very fascinating. Overall, I think Operation Bounce House is entertaining. I think it's a very fun premise. I think it has a nice cast of characters that are different than what you might expect for a story like this. And I think it gives the reader a lot to think about in such a fun and entertaining story. There's a lot under the surface. And for that reason, I do recommend picking it up. I think it's great. I also think it's great that it is a standalone, because I think you could read this book and be like, oh, there's more to this story, because there is. The universe feels huge. And I do respect that he's like, nah, this is a standalone. You get what you get. And to be clear, the story's ended. The story feels closed. There's just so much world building that gets put into it. You're like, oh, this feels like a very fleshed out world that I could read more about, but I don't need to, which is something I also kind of liked about it. So it's a recommendation for me. I recommend it. I think you should pick it up. If you're a DCC fan, I think you should at least give it a try. I enjoyed it immensely, and it feels very different. So, yeah, that's it for my spoiler-free review. Like I said, it does not make sense that I'm going to do a spoiler review, but I have things and emotions that I need to get off my chest. So if you would like to come back when you've read the novel, I'd love that. But you don't have to. This can be for like the 5 people who want to come back and hear my spoiler thoughts. This was enough time for you to click off. It's time to click off now if you don't want the spoiler thoughts. So there's 2 primary events I want to talk about in the spoiler section. The first one is when Oliver and Roger combine their efforts to first create that fake profile for that gamer. And the gamer's name has completely left my brain, and I feel like I'm not going to be able to find it fast enough, but it's when they first make the fake image of his ex-girlfriend sitting on the other streamer's lap. And because of Roger and the type of AI he is, he can get past all the filters. So that gamer thinks it's real, and he ends up going out of the game and attempting to kill both of them, and then in the process gets killed himself. This was a really interesting event for me, because you kind of have Oliver quickly dealing with like, should I feel bad about that? And it's like, no, these people literally pay to come and wipe out my planet. So no, we don't feel bad. But there is that moment where he's like, I like led to somebody's death. And I think that's such an interesting thing that Matt Dinniman put in there, because I could not stop thinking about that scene. Because if we take it out of the context of what's happening here, which is like literally going to war, I couldn't help but be like, there's this unreality of everything that happens online, and yet it becomes reality. So there's this fake image. There are these people who are fake talking, and then this person gets offline and goes make very real decisions that end up to people dying. And like, this happens in real life. And I don't know why the way it's described in the book was so interesting to me, but I kept just being like, I know I feel that I should feel this book is absurd. So why doesn't it feel that absurd? Why am I reading this experience and it's feeling realer than it should? I think that's one of the strongest things that SFF usually brings as a genre, which is exploring real world events and emotions through kind of more of an absurd or fantastical lens. And there's a lot of little moments in this book where I feel Matt's kind of exploring what it means to have an online persona. Like, you see all of these larger than life gamers that obviously he got inspiration from like the worst possible gamers. And how many of them in this story are really thinking about killing? You have them, and some of them are just the worst people, but is there an unreality to them? And this isn't a new thing. This concept has been explored in a lot of sci-fi. I'm thinking of a particular book, but even saying that book kind of is a major spoiler, so I feel like I can't even talk about it in case you haven't read it. But it's kind of interesting that I feel like in this book it's presented more absurd, but I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. That part stood out in my mind, and I think it's kind of a question that is in some ways unresolved in the novel, in a way that isn't unsatisfactory. It's just kind of like, this thing happened, and what's the reality of that? And I think it's in particular an interesting juxtaposition that he has Lulu be this online sex worker. I'm trying to think of what word they used. But for her, it's the same sort of thing. She has an online persona and it doesn't engage in anything real. Like she's not actually physically interacting with her clients. They are interacting in a virtual world, and how she talks about her clients kind of differently throughout the novel. At first, I wasn't quite sure why Dinniman had Lulu have that job. I wasn't sure kind of what the point was in the broader novel. But the more I kind of thought at the end, I was like, it's just showing different sides of how an online persona can be. And I think that's so fascinating in this novel that we have a lot of different options of online personas, some for real negative and violent and bad, and some maybe you decide if it's good or bad. Like I think some people are going to read Lulu's story and think it's negative. I think some could read it and find it positive. And yeah, I think that's fascinating. And I think that's a lot in this book that feels like it shouldn't be that serious. So that was kind of something I've been thinking a lot about. The second thing I want to talk about, which I think is really why the main reason that this is a 4 for me, is the end of the novel, which comes at you fast. There's a lot to unpack in the last 20 pages. In fact, I was reading it and I was reading this actually while we were visiting friends. And usually when I read when I visit friends, I just read a couple pages at a time and I'm, not trying to get through a lot. I'm going to pay attention to my friends. But I got to this and I was like, hey guys, I need to just go and read this because I don't understand how this book is going to wrap up in the last 20 pages. I kind of was surprised by how happy the ending was. And I think it makes sense for the story. I think the story probably needs that. I think people would be like, WTF, if it didn't. But there was a part of me that thought Oliver was just going to be dead. And I wouldn't have hated that ending. I know that's probably going to be so unpopular. But when you kind of get this story about, hey, these, I feel like I can't say the word. I actually don't know how to say it. Traducible AI? I know that's not it. I just, my brain skipped over the word every time I saw it. Whatever. When he's there and the Apex guy is like, dude, these AIs almost killed us. We had like a nuclear event over these AIs. Like, you cannot let this out. And Oliver has this realization like, oh, I did that with Roger. And is he really on our side or is he not on our side? And you kind of find out later that he really was going to destroy Earth, but decided not to for kind of like one reason. There was a part of me that just kind of wanted to end a little dark. Like, what an interesting choice to put all of that at the end. Part of me was like, maybe he should have put it earlier so we had more resolution time. But part of me is like, it's fascinating to find out all of this in the same way Oliver finds it out, because it really kind of makes this novel build and build and build and builds. And I thought, what an interesting ending when, Roger, whatever, is saying like, I don't know, the original Roger. Like, it sounds like the original Roger was the person who tried to wipe out New Sonora with the change to their food. And I just feel like, but then at the end, it's like Oliver's like, oh, good, I can get my body back. Roger's growing my body. Roger didn't actually defeat Earth. And it's fine. I don't know. I thought those reveals were all so interesting. And I thought maybe the book should have ended just a little bit more open-ended. Like maybe Oliver did die and no one knows that they unleashed this thing. And what is that Roger going to do? And is it AI versus humans? And I just don't know what to think about it. I just have to talk about it because it just wasn't what I expected. And it added a lot of depth. I'd love to know what you feel about that ending. I swear I don't really like sad endings. Or just like maybe if Oliver could have gone to body again, I just feel like there needed to be a little bit more cost. Like I get the 10th rule was to live. I don't know. I literally don't know. I'm sitting here saying I don't know what to think about the ending. I don't dislike it. I don't like it. I don't know how to feel about it. No, I like it. It's fine. It just all happened so quickly, and I think it got wrapped up a little too neatly for how much was dropped, even though I loved all the events. Okay, I think that's it. That's what I have to say. If you are here after it's released, like 2 months from now, I thank you. Please tell me your thoughts below, but maybe put a little warning that you are going to talk about spoilers, just 'cause I would love to know what you think of Operation Bounce House that I keep somehow wanting to call Project Bounce House. This is like the this inevitable ruin versus the inevitable run. It's one of those. I would love to know if you are excited about this book for when it comes out, if you've already pre-ordered it. I'd love to know if you've come back after reading it, what you think of some of my spoiler thoughts. Please let me know in the comment section below. As always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That's the best way to support me. If you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.review. I'll see you next time. Bye. Also, when I sat down to do this review, I saw this randomly on our desk, which is a Rhythm Mafia. Let's see if I can get it to, oh, go. No, I have to do that thing that people do online. No, it's not. Oh, there it goes. A Rhythm Mafia guitar pick. And I was like, told my husband, I was like, what is this? He's like, oh, I don't know. Someone gave it to me. And I'm like, Matt Dinniman must have given this to you. This is from the book. Anyway, I thought that was funny, and I kind of think it's cool that we own this. Don't know how it came to be in my house, really, and apparently neither does my husband, but it just appeared, so